They say no man is an island, but I was giving it a damn good try. At 38 years old, I had successfully executed the nerd's equivalent of a bank heist. I'd founded a software company based on an algorithm, so mind-numbingly boring it could sedate a hyena, nurtured it for a decade, and then sold it to a tech giant for a sum of money that felt less like a number and more like a typo. My wife, Sarah, and I had achieved the American dream. We'd won the game. The prize, apparently, was a sprawling house in a neighborhood called Serenity Meadows, a place so idyllic it felt like it had been designed by a committee of golden retriever owners. Retirement, I was discovering, is a dangerous vacuum. It abhors a lack of projects. For the first month, I was in bliss. I slept in. I made elaborate breakfasts. I watched daytime television with the critical eye of a film scholar. But by week 5, I was starting to get twitchy. My brain, accustomed to solving complex logistical problems, had started to optimize the dishwasher loading pattern and develop a new routing algorithm for taking out the trash. Sarah, an architect with an unnervingly accurate read on my burgeoning insanity, said, "You need a hobby, Alex. Something that doesn't involve reorganizing my spice rack." It wasn't random, I'd argued. I alphabetized it by country of origin. It's more intuitive. Her look suggested otherwise. So, I got a hobby. My hobby was browse government surplus and industrial auction websites. It started small, a commercial-grade espresso machine that could probably serve a whole aircraft carrier, a set of titanium wrenches designed for NASA. But then, one fateful Tuesday night, fueled by 2 glasses of excellent scotch and a profound sense of boredom, I found it. It was listed under Municipal Assets, Decommissioned. The pictures were grainy, the description sparse, but my heart sang. It was big. It was absurd. It was magnificent. I placed a bid. And, because my life is a series of questionable decisions followed by disproportionate consequences, I won. The first sign of trouble arrived on a Thursday morning. I was in the backyard, contemplating the philosophical implications of lawn aeration, when Sarah slid the glass door open. She held her tablet out to me, her expression a carefully calibrated blend of love and deep, deep concern. "Honey?" she began, using the tone she usually reserved for telling me I'd forgotten our anniversary or that my shirt was on inside out. "What did you buy?" I went for plausible deniability. "What makes you think I bought anything?" "The email confirmation for your winning bid on Lot 47B, 1998 Pierce-100 aerial ladder fire truck was a subtle clue," she said, her voice dry as a bone. "And the $48,000 charge on the credit card." I peered at the screen. Yep, there it was. "Ah," I said wisely. "That. Alex, you bought a fire truck." She wasn't yelling. Sarah's a believer in the power of quiet disappointment, which is far more effective. "Now, let's not be hasty with labels," I said, trying to project an aura of calm competence. "Technically, it's an aerial ladder platform. There's a significant difference. It's about reach and versatility. Think of the things we could do. We could clean the gutters without a ladder. We could rescue a bird from a very tall tree. We could even get a better view of the fireworks on the 4th of July. Sarah was unmoved. "It's red. According to the specs, it weighs 32 tons and is 50 feet long. It's the size of a blue whale, Alex. Where precisely are we going to park a blue whale?" "I was thinking the 3rd-car garage," I said thoughtfully. "We might need to knock out the back wall to make it fit, but see, it's a project. It'll keep me busy. Isn't that what you wanted?" She just shook her head and walked back inside, leaving me alone with the dawning glorious reality of my purchase. The delivery was scheduled for the following Monday. I was as giddy as a kid on Christmas Eve. The delivery was, in a word, an event. A massive flatbed truck, the kind used to transport tanks or sections of bridges, rumbled down our tranquil, tree-lined street. On its back, gleaming under the afternoon sun, was my prize. Big Red. It was more beautiful than the pictures. It was an absolute unit, a testament to American engineering and overkill. The chrome shone, The paint was a defiant, brilliant crimson, and the massive ladder was folded neatly on its back like a resting metal dragon. The truck driver, a man with a beard that had seen more winters than I had, expertly backed the flatbed into my driveway. The process of unloading it drew out the entire neighborhood. My neighbors, who had previously only offered polite waves, now stood on their perfectly manicured lawns, their faces a mixture of awe, confusion, and horror. Mr. Dacian Henderson from across the street, who washed his minivan every Saturday without fail, looked like he might faint. I signed the paperwork, beaming. The driver handed me a set of keys the size of my hand. "She's all yours, pal," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Just, try not to scare the locals." I watched as the flatbed drove away, leaving me alone with my new 32-ton hobby. It took up the entire driveway, its front bumper practically kissing the garage door, and its rear end hanging out over the sidewalk. It was the most beautiful, glorious, and utterly out-of-place thing I had ever seen. A single perfect crack in the serene beige facade of Serenity Meadows, and it was all mine. The morning after Big Red's arrival, the dew was still fresh on the grass, and the world felt full of possibility. I was outside with a soft cloth and a bottle of chrome polish, giving one of the massive hubcaps a loving shine. This was ownership. This was pride. This was, apparently, a problem. Ahem. The sound was quiet, but it cut through the chirping of the birds like a thrown knife. I looked up. Standing on the edge of my lawn, as if she were afraid to touch it, was a woman. She was in her late 50s, dressed in crisp khaki slacks and a polo shirt the color of weak lemonade. She had a helmet of perfectly coiffed iron-gray hair, and she was holding a clipboard against her chest like a riot shield. She radiated an aura of someone who complains to the manager as a recreational sport. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't smile. She just launched into her offensive. "That thing," she said, gesturing vaguely at my magnificent truck with her pen. "It needs to be moved." "Good morning to you too," I said cheerfully. "I'm Alex. I just moved in." Her eyes, small and sharp, scanned me from head to toe, and I could feel myself being assessed, weighed, and found wanting. "I am Carol," she announced, as if she were a visiting monarch. "I am the president of the Serenity Meadows Homeowners Association." Of course she was. "According to the HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions," she continued, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on her clipboard. "Bylaw 17, Section C, Paragraph 4, clearly states, no commercial, industrial, or heavy-duty vehicles shall be parked in public view on any residential lot for a period exceeding 2 hours for loading or unloading purposes." I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Well, that's a mouthful. But you see, it's not a commercial vehicle. It's decommissioned. It's a classic. It's a piece of American history. I'm thinking of it as a very large recreational vehicle." Carol's lips tightened into a thin, bloodless line. "The bylaws are not a matter of interpretation, mister." "Alex," I supplied again. "And the truck's name is Big Red." "The vehicle," she corrected, her voice dripping with disdain, "is an eyesore. It's lowering property values with every minute it sits here. The Hendersons are very distressed. Their prize-winning petunias are in its shadow." I glanced across the street. Mr. Henderson was peeking through his blinds. He snapped them shut the moment I saw him. It was during this delightful exchange that she gestured to the side of my property. A simple gravel path, about 12 feet wide, ran along the edge of my lawn, separating my property from the dense woods behind the neighborhood. "And another thing," she said, her tone shifting to one of high alert. "I've noticed you eyeing the fire truck access road." "Is that what that is?" I asked innocently. "I figured it was a service path." "It is for emergency use only," she declared, puffing up slightly. "And I am the sole arbiter of what constitutes an emergency in Serenity Meadows." That's when I noticed it. The entrance to the road wasn't just an open path. A series of large, artfully placed boulders, the kind you see in expensive Zen gardens, were arranged near the mouth of the road. Woven between them were several thorny, meticulously maintained rose bushes. It was less of an access road and more of a decorative, impassable suggestion of a road. You know, I said, pointing, for a fire access road, it looks awfully inaccessible. A fire truck would have a hard time getting past those rocks and roses. A thin, self-satisfied smile touched Carol's lips. Exactly, she said. It discourages riff-raff. And joyriders. We had an issue with teenagers a few years back. This is a far more aesthetically pleasing solution than a chain-link fence. I'm pretty sure it's also a violation of the fire code, I countered. An emergency vehicle needs to be able to, access it. She waved a dismissive hand, the clipboard glinting in the sun. That's a matter for the HOA board to discuss. And as president, I can assure you, we are satisfied with the current arrangement. She gave Big Red one last look of utter revulsion. You have 24 hours to have that monstrosity removed from public view, or official violation notices will be issued. Good day. She turned on her heel and marched back to her own immaculate house down the street, leaving me standing in the shadow of my glorious 32-ton problem child. The battle lines, it seemed, had been drawn, and the first shot was fired over a set of decorative fire truck blocking boulders. A week passed. I managed to appease the HOA, temporarily, by renting a storage space at a nearby industrial park for Big Red. It felt like leaving my child at a grim concrete and steel boarding school. I'd visited on afternoons, polishing a fender here, checking the tire pressure there, dreaming of the day I could bring it home. My project of knocking out the back wall of the garage had been met with a stare from Sarah so potent it could have withered steel, so Big Red's exile was indefinite. The feud with Carol had settled into a cold war. I received a passive-aggressive welcome basket from her 3 days late, containing a copy of the HOA bylaws with several sections highlighted in yellow and a single slightly stale bran muffin. In return, I made sure to wave with excessive enthusiasm every time I saw her. Then came Saturday. It was a perfect autumn afternoon, the kind of day that makes you want to drink cider and wear a sweater. I was raking leaves, a thoroughly suburban activity, when I heard a commotion down the street. It started as a single high-pitched wail, then voices, then the general hum of a developing situation. Curiosity got the better of me. I leaned my rake against the house and ambled down the block. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk in front of Carol's house. They were all staring up into the branches of the ancient, sprawling oak tree that dominated her front yard. And there, perched on a branch that was far too high and far too thin, was a fluffy, terrified-looking Persian cat, letting out a series of pitiful meows. I recognized it immediately. It was Carol's prized cat, a creature of immense fluff and arrogance she called Chairman Meow. The chairman, it appeared, had staged a coup and ended up in a position he couldn't get out of. Carol was on the ground below, wringing her hands and alternating between cooing at the cat and shouting at her silent, defeated-looking husband, who was holding an extension ladder that was clearly about 30 feet too short. "Do something, George!" she shrieked. George just looked mournfully from the top of the ladder to the cat, then back down again. Inevitably, someone had called 911. A few minutes later, a fire engine from the local department rumbled to a stop. Not an aerial ladder truck, just a standard pumper engine. A young, competent-looking fire captain hopped out and surveyed the scene. He listened to Carol's frantic explanation, then tilted his head back to look at the stranded feline. "Okay, ma'am, not a problem," the captain said in a calm, professional voice. "The cat's pretty high up. We'll need to get the ladder truck in here to reach it safely." He looked around. "The best approach would be from that access road right there. We can get the truck right alongside the tree line." He pointed directly at the gravel path next to my house, the one currently decorated with Carol's award-winning peace roses and strategically placed multi-ton boulders. A hush fell over the small crowd. Carol's face, which had been a mask of frantic worry, hardened. "Absolutely not," she said. The fire captain blinked. "I'm sorry? You can't bring a truck down that path," she said, her voice rising. "Those are my award-winning roses. They won 3rd place at the Tri-County Garden Show, and those boulders were professionally installed. They're granite." The captain stared at her, his professionalism being stress-tested in real time. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dangerously patient. "It's a fire access road. Its entire purpose its very reason for existing, is to be accessed by a fire truck. But it's not a fire, Carol insisted, her logic twisting into a pretzel. It's a cat, a non-emergency. Surely you can just, I don't know, send your skinniest man up the tree? The fire captain took a deep breath, visibly counting to 10. Ma'am, we are not authorized to destroy private property for a non-life-threatening animal rescue. Our policy is clear. If we can't get access without causing damage, our hands are tied. He gestured to the impassable rock garden. We can't get our vehicle through there. Carol was apoplectic. She argued. She pleaded. She threatened to call the mayor. The fire crew stood by, patient but firm. Eventually, after recommending she call a private arborist who might be able to climb the tree, they packed up their gear, got back in their engine, and drove away, leaving Carol and the crowd staring up at the still meowing chairman. I watched the entire exchange with a growing sense of cosmic, beautiful, delicious irony. The one person in the entire world who needed a large, ladder-equipped vehicle to gain access via that specific road was the very person who had made it her life's mission to block it. My eyes drifted from the stranded cat, to the fuming Carol, to the uselessly short ladder her husband was now trying to fold. And then, I looked back down the street, towards my own house. I couldn't see it from here, but I knew what was just out of sight. My gaze went to the now empty storage facility in my mind's eye, where a certain decommissioned, 32-ton, 100-foot aerial ladder platform sat waiting. A seed of an idea, a terrible, glorious, petty, and utterly brilliant idea, began to sprout in the fertile ground of my forced retirement. It was time to bring Big Red home. The Chairman Meow incident was more than just a moment of karmic justice. It was a catalyst. It revealed a fundamental weakness in Carol's fortress of bylaws and beige tyranny. Her power was absolute only as long as she never needed anything from anyone. The universe had presented me with an opportunity, and I was not about to let it go to waste. But I needed a pretense, a Trojan horse. A project so big, so undeniably disruptive, that it would necessitate the use of the fire access road, not just once, but repeatedly. That night, over dinner, I laid out my plan to Sarah. I've been thinking, I began, pushing a piece of salmon around my plate. The garage just isn't big enough, and I've always wanted a proper workshop, a place to tinker. And you know how I've been getting into astrophotography. Sarah looked at me over the rim of her wine glass, her eyes narrowed. Where's this going, Alex? I want to build a workshop in the backyard, I declared. A proper one, 2 stories. The ground floor will be for projects you know, welding, woodworking, tinkering with Big Red. The second floor will be an observatory, with a retractable roof, state-of-the-art. It was a genuine passion, but I had deliberately scaled it up to provocative proportions. A simple shed wouldn't require a parade of heavy machinery. A 2-story workshop with a concrete foundation, however. Sarah sighed, the long, weary sigh of a woman who knew she was fighting a losing battle. A 2-story workshop, in the backyard of Serenity Meadows. Alex, do you think Carol will just allow that? Allow it? She'll have to, I said with a grin. I'll get all the proper city permits. I'll follow every single rule. The HOA can't block a fully permitted construction project. And, most importantly, the only way to get the concrete trucks, the excavator, and the building materials into the backyard is via that little gravel path she's so fond of. Sarah put her face in her hands for a moment, then looked up. A tiny smile played on her lips. You are a child, a giant, devious child. But I'm your giant, devious child, I said. Fine, she conceded. Build your ridiculous nerd palace. Just try to keep the legal fees to a minimum. My next step was to find a contractor. I didn't want some slick corporate construction firm. I needed an artist, a fellow connoisseur of chaos. I found him through a recommendation from a guy at the hardware store. His name was Frank. Frank was in his early 60s, with a thick gray mustache that seemed to contain a universe of unspoken wisdom. He wore faded jeans, scuffed work boots, and a flannel shirt. He drove a beat-up Ford F-150 that looked like it had survived a war. He arrived at our house the next day, and I showed him my architectural sketches, drawn by Sarah, who couldn't resist a design challenge. He listened intently, nodding as I described the workshop, the observatory, the retractable roof. He walked the property line, kicking at the dirt with his boot. He stared at the dense woods behind the house. Finally, he turned to me. "Big job," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Gonna need to get heavy equipment back here. Concrete truck for the slab, a mini excavator for the footings, lumber deliveries. It's gonna be a parade." "Yep," I said, barely containing my glee. "And there's only one way to get it all in." I pointed a dramatic finger towards the access road, with its decorative boulders and defiant roses. Frank looked at the blockade. He looked over at Carol's house, where she was currently pretending to prune a perfectly healthy hedge while watching our every move. He looked back at me. A slow, magnificent grin spread across his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Ah," he said, a world of understanding in that single syllable. "I see. This isn't a construction job, is it, son?" "Oh, it's a construction job," I replied. "But it's one that also serves as a long-term, fully permitted campaign of psychological warfare." Frank let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh. He slapped me on the back, hard enough to make me stumble. "I like it. My boys are gonna love this. I'll take the job. But I'm adding a clause to the contract for hazard pay." "Hazard pay?" "For emotional damages," he said, his eyes twinkling. "Dealing with that," he jerked his head towards Carol, "is gonna require extra compensation. And tacos. The crew works better with tacos." "Frank," I said, shaking his calloused hand, "I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship." The War Council was convened. The alliance had been formed. The following Monday was day, or, more accurately, B-Day, for Bobcat. Frank's crew arrived at the ungodly hour of 7:45 a.m. His crew consisted of two guys, Dave and Gary, who looked to be in their 30s and communicated primarily through a series of sarcastic grunts and shared, knowing looks. They moved with the easy competence of people who had been doing this their whole lives. The first order of business was to clear the access road. Frank directed Dave, who was at the controls of a small but mighty Bobcat skid-steer loader. The moment the diesel engine coughed to life and let out its signature roar, Carol was out of her house like a shot, phone already pressed to her ear. "She's fast," Gary noted, leaning on a shovel. "You gotta give her that." "Olympic level dialing speed," Dave agreed from the cab of the Bobcat. They hadn't even touched the first boulder when a familiar black and white patrol car pulled up. Out stepped a young police officer, his face etched with a weariness that went far beyond his years. His name tag read Miller. He looked at the Bobcat, at Frank and his crew, at me, and finally at Carol, who was speed-walking towards him pointing a trembling finger. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," she cried, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "They're destroying HOA, common area property. It's vandalism. They're about to tear up my garden." Officer Miller sighed, a deep, soul-cleansing sigh that seemed to say, "This is not what I pictured when I graduated from the academy." He approached our group. "All right, what's going on here?" Frank, calm as a summer morning, stepped forward. "Morning, officer. We've got a permit to begin construction on a new structure on Mr. Henderson's property here." He handed over a sheaf of papers. "City-approved plans, signed and sealed. We just need to use this utility easement to get our equipment to the build site." I chimed in, holding up my own copy of the neighborhood plot plan, which I had printed and laminated for just such an occasion. "As you can see, officer, this path is clearly marked as a 12-foot utility and emergency vehicle easement. We have every legal right to access it." Miller looked from our paperwork to Carol. "Ma'am, is this true? Is this a designated easement?" "It's a community garden," she sputtered. "It's for the beautification of the neighborhood." "It's a fire access road you've blocked with rocks, Carol," I said gently. "We'll be happy to replant your roses when the project is finished. Frank's a bit of a horticulturist on the side, does amazing things with mulch." Frank, without missing a beat, added a deadpan, "I dabble." Officer Miller pinched the bridge of his nose. He looked at Carol, then back at us. The choice was between a frantic woman with no legal standing and two men armed with official, city-stamped documents. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "This is a civil matter. They have a permit, and this is a legal easement. They are allowed to clear it to gain access. Please, let these men do their work." He paused, his gaze hardening slightly. "Do not make me come back here today. My patience is finite." It was a small but profound victory. Carol, sputtering wordlessly, retreated to her porch, where she sat down heavily in a wicker chair to glare at us. Officer Miller gave us a short nod, got back in his car, and drove away. "All right, boys," Frank said with a clap of his hands. "You heard the man. Let's move some rocks." With a triumphant roar of the engine, Dave lowered the Bobcat's bucket and nudged the first boulder. It rolled aside with a satisfying thud. One by one, the boulders were moved. Gary carefully dug up the prize-winning roses, placing them in large plastic pots with the care of a surgeon. Within an hour, the road was clear. The first concrete truck arrived a little while later, its massive chute swinging into position. As the gray sludge poured into the foundation forms of my future nerd palace, I caught Carol's eye from across her yard. She looked away, but not before I saw the flicker of rage. The war had begun, and I had won the first battle. My sense of victory lasted approximately 48 hours. The pouring of the foundation was a beautiful, tangible sign of progress. Frank and his crew worked with an efficiency that was a joy to watch, but I had underestimated my adversary. I was playing checkers. Carol was playing a much stupider, more annoying version of chess, where she could invent new pieces at will. The retaliation came not with a bang, but with the quiet rustle of envelopes being pushed through my mail slot. On Wednesday afternoon, I found a small mountain of official-looking correspondence from the Serenity Meadows HOA. There were 4 separate letters. The first was a fine for $250 for the unauthorized modification of common area landscaping. A footnote specified this was for the improper relocation of award-winning Rosa Peace varietals. The second was a formal violation notice for excessive construction noise outside of approved hours. The bylaws she had helpfully included stated that construction could begin at 8:00 a.m. Frank's crew had fired up the Bobcat at 7:45 a.m. I was being fined $50 for those 15 minutes of illicit engine noise. The third was a warning regarding Big Red. Apparently, in an emergency meeting convened the night before, the HOA board, which I suspected consisted of Carol, her cat, and a rubber stamp, had passed a new amendment to the bylaws. It now prohibited any vehicle exceeding a gross weight of 2.5 tons from being parked on residential property for any reason. Big Red weighed 32 tons. The letter informed me that my previous solution of parking it in the driveway was now explicitly forbidden. The fourth letter was the most petty, and therefore the most impressive. It was a notice of non-compliance regarding my mailbox. Apparently, my mailbox, the standard one that had come with the house, was 1.5 inches closer to the curb than the 24 inches mandated by Bylaw 32, Section F. I had a week to remedy this or face further fines. I spread the letters out on the kitchen island like a losing hand of poker. Sarah came in and read them over my shoulder. "Alex, this is getting out of hand," she said, her voice laced with genuine concern. "She's starting a paper war. You can't win a war against someone with this much free time and a laser printer." "It's intimidation, Sarah," I countered, tapping the mailbox violation. "She's trying to bleed me dry with 1,000 tiny cuts. 1.5 inches? This isn't about rules, it's about control." "So what are you going to do? This is insane. Just go talk to her, take her a peace offering, a pie or something, apologize for the noise, for existing, for whatever it is she's mad about." I looked at her, my resolve hardening. "No," I said, perhaps a bit too dramatically. "There can be no peace with this kind of tyranny. You don't negotiate with terrorists who use begonias and bylaws as their weapons. This means war." Sarah sighed and poured herself a very large glass of wine. "Fine," she said, "but when her next move is to claim our house paint is half a shade too beige, don't come crying to me." I paid the fines, moved the mailbox exactly 1.5 inches back, and told Frank to be damn sure he didn't start work a minute before 9:00 a.m. from now on, as I was sure Carol had already drafted another amendment changing the start time. The concrete was set, the foundation was ready, but I had a feeling the path to my workshop was about to get a lot more complicated. I woke up on Friday morning to a strange sight. My neighbor, Mr. Henderson, was standing at the end of his driveway, just staring towards the access road. He had a mug of coffee in his hand and a look of profound bewilderment on his face. This was unusual. Mr. Henderson's morning routine was as predictable as the sunrise. This deviation could only mean one thing: trouble. I threw on a robe and went outside. I followed his gaze. My heart sank. The access road was blocked again, but this time it wasn't the elegant, easily movable boulders. This was a whole new level of petty. Overnight, Carol had engaged in what I could only describe as guerrilla gardening. A perfectly straight line of at least a dozen dense, thorny pyracantha bushes had been planted directly across the path. These weren't small decorative shrubs. They were mature, angry-looking plants, their branches already interwoven to form a spiky, impenetrable hedge. But that wasn't all. Behind the hedge of thorns, she had installed a new fence. It was a charmingly rustic split-rail fence, the kind you'd see at a pumpkin patch. It was also deeply, thoroughly, and immovably cemented into the ground. I could see the fresh concrete at the base of each post. And the masterstroke, the cherry on top of this passive-aggressive sundae, was a small, professionally printed sign staked in the middle of the new hedge. It read, in a cheerful, flowing script, "Serenity Meadows Community Garden, Est 2025. Please respect the plants." In the center of the garden, placed with deliberate, infuriating care, was a small, concrete bird bath. I just stood there, speechless. It was a work of art, a masterpiece of malicious compliance. She hadn't just blocked the road, she had recontextualized it. It was no longer a utility easement, it was a community feature. To remove it would be an act of civic vandalism. I pulled out my phone and called Frank. "You're not going to believe this," I said. "Let me guess." His rumbling voice came through the phone. "She replaced the rocks." "Replaced them?" "Frank, she's built the goddamn Gardens of Babylon. There's a fence, there are thorn bushes, there's a bird bath, Frank. A bird bath." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, I heard a low chuckle. "Wow," he said, a note of genuine admiration in his voice. "I'm not even mad. I'm impressed. The woman is diabolical. And fast. This is professional-grade spite." A few minutes later, Frank's truck pulled up, followed by Dave and Gary. They got out and surveyed the scene. Dave whistled, long and low. "Is that a bird bath?" "Yep," Gary confirmed, walking closer to inspect it. "She put in a bird bath. That's a power move right there. You can't just tear out a bird bath. It's bad for the birds. It's bad karma." Frank stroked his mustache, his mind clearly working. "The framing lumber for the walls is supposed to be delivered this afternoon." "Well, it's not coming down this road," I said, kicking at one of the new fence posts. It didn't budge. "So what do we do? We can't get a bobcat through that without looking like monsters who hate nature and small, thirsty birds." Frank stared at the blockade, a strange glint in his eye. He looked at Carol's house, where the curtains twitched. He looked back at the fence. "Well, son," he said slowly, "this has now become a matter of professional pride. She wants to play landscape architect? Fine. Let's play." The game had changed. The pieces were on the board. And my opponent had just built a fortress protected by thorns and the moral superiority of avian hydration. The following 2 weeks descended into a farcical game of suburban spy versus spy. Construction on the workshop ground to a halt. The framing lumber sat in a warehouse, accruing storage fees. Frank's crew, bless their patient hearts, were on standby. Meanwhile, my life became a series of escalating petty skirmishes with Carol. Her opening move was to report Big Red to the city. I received a stern letter from the Municipal Code Enforcement Office regarding an unlicensed, oversized industrial vehicle being stored within city limits. This forced me to spend an entire Tuesday at the DMV, a place that sucks the joy from life like a black hole. After 3 hours of paperwork and navigating bureaucratic labyrinths, I successfully managed to get Big Red registered as a historic antique vehicle, complete with a special set of plates. It cost me $300 and a significant portion of my sanity, but it was now 100% street legal. I made sure to drive it past her house once, very slowly, on my way back to the storage facility. My countermove was to become an obsessive scholar of the HOA bylaws she had so kindly provided. I spent an evening reading the entire 150-page document, highlighter in hand, and I found gold. Bylaw 74, Section B. No externally mounted antennae, including satellite dishes, shall exceed 24 inches in diameter. I went outside with a tape measure. Carol's satellite dish, proudly mounted on her roof, was a whopping 26 inches. I filed an anonymous complaint online, complete with a time-stamped photo. 2 days later, a van from the satellite company was at her house, replacing it. It was a small, deeply satisfying victory. Carol retaliated by trying to get Frank's construction permit revoked. She filed a complaint with the city planning department, claiming that the concrete runoff from my foundation pour was contaminating the local watershed. This backfired spectacularly. The city sent a humorless inspector named Stan, who took one look at Frank's immaculate site complete with sediment fences and hay bale sand, gave it a glowing review. He ended up writing Carol a warning for filing a frivolous complaint. My turn. I discovered that a local pizzeria had a new online ordering system. On a Friday night, I ordered a large pepperoni and pineapple pizza. Controversial choice, I know, but this was Warren accidentally typed in Carol's address instead of my own. I then called the pizzeria and canceled it, claiming I'd made a mistake. The resulting confusion on Carol's porch as a pizza boy tried to deliver a phantom pizza was, I'm told by my grinning neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a sight to behold. This escalating series of annoyances culminated in the second official visit from Officer Miller. Carol, apparently convinced I was some kind of high-tech peeping Tom, called the police to report that I was using my new observatory to spy on her. Miller arrived at my door at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday. His shoulders slumped. The light in his eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a deep, existential exhaustion. "Let me guess," he said, not even waiting for me to speak. "She thinks your death ray is warming up." "Even better," I said. "She thinks my telescope is a tool of espionage." I led him through the house to the backyard, where my new, high-powered telescope was set up on the concrete slab of the unfinished workshop. Sarah was there, looking through the eyepiece. "Evening, officer," Sarah said pleasantly. "Care for a look at Saturn? The rings are beautiful tonight." Officer Miller stood there for a long moment, staring at the telescope, then at Sarah, then at me. He looked like a man on the brink of a major life change. "Seriously?" he finally managed. "Stargazing? Is there a law against appreciating the majestic rings of a gas giant, officer?" I asked. "Because if so, you can lock me up right now. I'm guilty as charged." He turned away without another word, keyed the radio on his shoulder. "Dispatch," he said, his voice flat as a month-old soda. Situation resolved. Subject was, looking at space. There was a pause. "No, I'm not kidding. Clear the call." He walked away without looking back. As I watched him go, I realized this couldn't continue. The pettiness was amusing, but it wasn't getting my workshop built. The framing lumber was waiting. Frank's crew was getting restless. Carol's thorny fence and birdbath protected blockade was still there, a monument to her unyielding stubbornness. I had tried reason. I had tried the law. I had tried retaliatory annoyance. Nothing worked. She was a fortress. But as I stood there under the vast, starry sky, my gaze drifted from Saturn towards the direction of the industrial park. A fortress can't be reasoned with. It can't be annoyed. It has to be bypassed. Or, perhaps, gone over. The gears in my head started to turn, clicking into place with a slow, heavy, and deeply satisfying rhythm. The day of reckoning was a Friday. A week after Officer Miller's visit about the telescope, the framing company had called. It was now or never. They could deliver the lumber today, or I'd lose my spot and have to wait another 3 weeks. The pressure was on. I woke up with a sense of grim determination, I had a plan. It was audacious, possibly illegal, in some obscure way I hadn't thought of, and completely, utterly insane. It was perfect. I walked outside with my morning coffee, expecting to see the same sight. The hedge, the fence, the bird bath. But Carol had decided to add one final flourish. She had escalated beyond my wildest dreams. She had parked her Caribland, beige Buick LeSabre, that was the automotive equivalent of a sigh, directly in front of her community garden. It was parked perpendicular to the path, its bumpers just inches from the fence on one side and the bushes on the other. It completely, totally, and unequivocally blocked any and all access. And as a final, magnificent gesture of defiance, she had chained a large, rusty push lawnmower to the front axle of the Buick, and the other end of the chain was padlocked to one of the fence posts. She had created a blockade of personal property so absolute, so flagrant, that to tamper with it would be an undeniable crime. I couldn't move the car. I couldn't cut the chain. She had me. Checkmate. And there she was, sitting on her front porch in a rocking chair, sipping from a tall glass of iced tea, a triumphant smirk plastered on her face. She saw me looking. She raised her glass in a mock toast. My phone rang. It was the delivery truck driver. "Yeah, hi. I've got a load of lumber for Alex. I'm at the entrance to Serenity Meadows. Where do you want this?" My heart pounded in my chest. It was now or never. "Hold tight," I said, my voice tight. "I'm making a path. Give me 30 minutes. I hung up and immediately called Frank. "She's parked her car in the way," I said, the words coming out in a rush. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him exhale slowly. "A car? Well, that's it then. That's checkmate, son. You can't touch a person's vehicle. Unless you've got a cargo helicopter." A slow grin spread across my face. I looked from the smug queen on her porch throne to the empty spot in my driveway. I thought of the 32-ton behemoth sitting in its concrete stable a few miles away. "I don't have a helicopter, Frank," I said, my voice full of a newfound giddy calm. "But I have the next best thing. Get your crew over here, and tell them to bring their hard hats. Things are about to get interesting." This was it. The moment the last 2 months had been building towards. This wasn't about a workshop anymore. This was about freedom. It was about justice. It was about the fundamental right of a man to get heavy equipment into his own backyard. This was the Battle of Serenity Meadows. My first move was to retrieve my weapon. I called a cab to the industrial park. Standing before Big Red, I felt a surge of adrenaline. I patted its massive front grille. "Time to go to work, old friend," I whispered. Driving it back was a thrill. The sheer size of the truck made other cars scatter like minnows. I pulled into my driveway, the roar of the diesel engine announcing my arrival. My neighbors, drawn by the noise, began to emerge from their houses, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning excitement. They sensed that the Cold War was about to go hot. Carol, from her porch, stopped rocking. Her smirk faltered, replaced by a look of wary confusion. Frank's truck pulled up, and his crew got out. Dave and Gary looked at Big Red, then at Carol's blockade, then back at me. Their faces lit up with pure, unadulterated glee. "No way," Dave breathed. "No freaking way." Frank just walked up, a roll of blueprints in his hand, and gave Big Red an appreciative slap on its tire. "It's bigger than I remembered." Sarah came out onto our porch. She took in the scene, me standing proudly by my fire truck, Frank and his crew looking like a team of giddy commandos, the growing crowd of neighbors, and Carol, now standing, her hands on her hips. Sarah just shook her head, a small, resigned smile on her lips. "Just try not to get arrested, okay? International maritime law doesn't count, right?" I called back. She rolled her eyes and went back inside. That was all the blessing I needed. "All right, gentlemen," I said, rubbing my hands together. "Operation Overpass is a go." I climbed into the cab of Big Red. It felt like stepping onto the bridge of a battleship. I took a deep breath, turned the key, and the engine roared to life. The whole world seemed to vibrate. I expertly maneuvered the massive truck to the edge of my lawn, getting it as close to the access road as possible. Deploying outriggers! I shouted, mostly to myself. With a series of deeply satisfying hydraulic hisses, the four massive stabilizing arms extended from the truck's body. They slammed down onto the grass with a series of heavy, earth-shaking thuds. K-chunk, 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 K-chunk. The truck lifted slightly, its suspension settling. It was now a stable, immovable platform. Carol had taken a few steps off her porch, her face now a mask of disbelief and horror. The neighbors were all filming with their phones. Frank stood on the sidewalk, a walkie-talkie in his hand. He was my ground guide. "You are clear for launch, Houston," he said into the radio, his voice deadpan. I climbed out of the cab and ascended the ladder to the turntable controls at the base of the massive ladder. This was the conductor's podium. With a steady hand, I engaged the hydraulics. Slowly, majestically, with a low hydraulic hum, the 100-foot aerial ladder began to rise. It unfolded itself, section by section, a colossal metal arm reaching for the brilliant blue sky. It went up and up and up, casting a shadow that stretched across the street. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Once it was clear of the power lines and the tops of the trees, I began the pivot. The entire apparatus swung in a slow, deliberate, impossibly graceful arc. It swung over my lawn, over the sidewalk, and then, the moment of truth, it swung out over Carol's property. It passed directly over the roof of her house. Her mouth was hanging open. She was pointing, speechless. I wasn't aiming for the sky. I was building a bridge. I continued to extend the ladder, not up, but out. It passed over her prize-winning petunias, over her perfectly manicured lawn, over her spiked garden, her thorn bushes, her cemented-in fence. It sailed cleanly over the roof of her beige Buick and the chained lawnmower. Frank's voice crackled over the walkie-talkie. "All right, Alex, you're clear of her roof. Watch out for that TV antenna on the backside. Easy, easy now. You're over the car. You're over the fence. And touchdown. The Eagle has landed. I repeat, the Eagle has landed." The platform at the end of the ladder touched down gently on the gravel of the access road, on the other side of the blockade. I had done it. I had created a bypass through the air, a 100-foot-long steel middle finger to tyranny. The lumber delivery truck, which had been waiting patiently down the street, rumbled forward. Frank, Dave, and Gary, now equipped with straps and pulleys, sprang into action. Using the ladder as a makeshift gantry crane, they began unloading the massive framing beams. They hooked them on the ground, and I would hoist them up, swing them over the blockade, and set them down in my backyard. It was slow, it was methodical, it was completely absurd, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The entire operation took about an hour and a half. It was, without a doubt, the most spectacular event in the history of Serenity Meadows. Traffic on our normally quiet street slowed to a crawl as people stopped to gawk at the giant red ladder stretching across the sky like a modern art installation. Of course, Officer Miller showed up. Someone had called the police. Probably Carol, on every phone she owned. He pulled up, got out of his car, and just stared. He took in the fire truck, the massive outriggers planted in my lawn, the ladder forming a bridge over Carol's house, and the lumber flying through the air. He looked at Carol, who was now just standing silently on her lawn, utterly, comprehensively defeated. He looked at me, perched atop my war machine. He walked over to Frank. "Is he breaking any laws?" Miller asked, his voice heavy with resignation. Frank stroked his mustache. "Well, officer, he's using his own legally registered antique vehicle, on his own property. He hasn't touched her property, hasn't set foot on it. As for the airspace above her house, I think that's probably FAA jurisdiction, and I don't see any planes trying to land." Officer Miller stood there for another long moment. He looked up at the ladder. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. He shook his head, turned around, got back in his car, and drove away without saying another word to anyone. It was the most beautiful act of non-enforcement I had ever witnessed. By the time the last beam was unloaded, Carol's spirit was broken. The fight had gone out of her. She had been outmaneuvered, outplanned, and publicly, gloriously outpettied. Her neighbors weren't on her side. They were on my side, cheering and taking videos. The myth of her authority, built on a foundation of flimsy bylaws and intimidation, had been shattered by 32 tons of American steel and a bit of creative thinking. That evening, an email went out to all the residents of Serenity Meadows. There was to be an emergency HOA meeting in the community clubhouse. I didn't attend. I was busy in my backyard with Frank and the crew, drinking a celebratory beer next to a freshly delivered pile of lumber. Mr. Henderson filled me in the next day. The meeting was short. It was brutal. Faced with a room full of neighbors who had either witnessed my triumph or seen the viral videos of it, Carol's support evaporated. There was a vote of no confidence. She was forced to resign as president, effective immediately. The new HOA board's first official act was to pass a motion to hire a landscaping company to permanently and completely clear the fire access road of all obstructions in the interest of community safety. Their second act was to draft a formal letter of apology to the local fire department. 3 months later, the world was a different place. My workshop was finished. It was a thing of beauty. 2 stories of cedar and glass, with a retractable roof on the top floor that opened up to the heavens. Frank, Dave, and Gary had outdone themselves. Big Red was now parked permanently and proudly in a new, oversized third garage bay I'd had Frank build alongside the workshop. It was no longer a weapon of war, but a monument to a hard-won peace. We were having a barbecue in the backyard to celebrate. Frank and his crew were there, now more friends than contractors. Mr. Henderson came over, bringing a bowl of potato salad and asking if he could get a tour of the observatory later. The neighborhood felt different, lighter. The oppressive cloud of beige tyranny had lifted. Across the street, staked into Carol's perfectly manicured lawn, was a large "For Sale" sign. They were moving to a condo downtown. Apparently, the suburbs had lost their charm. Frank raised his bottle of beer in a toast. "To the quiet life," he said with a wink. I clinked my bottle against his. "To keeping busy." Sarah came out from the kitchen carrying a tray of cheeseburgers. She surveyed the Sanitha-finished workshop, the happy gathering, the setting sun glinting off Big Red's chrome. "You know," she said, setting the tray down, "I have to admit, my husband, the giant, devious child, was right about one thing." "Oh?" I asked, sliding an arm around her. "What's that?" She smiled, a genuine, beautiful smile, and looked over at the fire truck. "Sometimes," she said, "you really do need a bigger tool for the job." I looked at my workshop, my friends, my amazing wife, and my ridiculous, wonderful 32-ton Swiss Army knife of a truck. I had found my serenity in Serenity Meadows, not by conforming to its rules, but by rewriting them 100 feet up in the air. I took a bite of my burger. It tasted like victory.